Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. South Korea-U.S. trade tensions are back in the spotlight. President Trump has announced a tariff hike restoring 25% rate on Korean cars, wood, and pharmaceuticals. And at the center of the dispute, delays in Korea's National Assembly over the U.S. investment special law and mounting pressure from Washington for faster action on strategic projects like the Alaska LNG pipeline. With midterms approaching and a Supreme Court ruling on tariff legality expected soon, the stakes are rising. Joining us to unpack what's driving this escalation is Henry Haggard, a senior advisor at WestExec Advisors and former political counselor at the U.S. Embassy in Seoul, joining us here in the studio with us. A big welcome.
Good to see you. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. So let's start right away with the biggest news, of course. So President Trump, he officially announced that he's raising tariffs back to the pre-trade deal level of 25%. So from your vantage point, what do you think is actually driving this decision inside Washington?
Yeah, that's really the question that everyone is trying to get the answer to. And I think before looking at that question, let's look at where are we right now. We're in the middle of a negotiation, and the South Korean negotiators are some of the best in the world. And the fact that they haven't gotten a quick resolution, a step back from this potential raise to 25%, doesn't mean that the game is over. The game has just begun. And really, more important than the stage as important as the stage of the negotiations is what's at stake. This is about the investment that the United States is very eager to have. It's the investment that Korean companies want to make. And so I think that looking forward, I think they'll get to a resolution, but right now before we get to how bad it could be and what impact it could have, I think we just first take a second and have some confidence in the strong Korean negotiating team and in the clear desire by both parties to have this trade agreement get implemented.
Right, so we should keep in mind that we're still in the middle of discussions.
That's right.
Right, so we are aware that the immediate trigger, at least publicly, it seems to be the delay in Korea's National Assembly passing the U.S. investment special law. So how do you think officials in Washington view this as a political stalling within Korean domestic politics, or more of a procedural holdup?
What gives me some confidence here is my knowledge of how closely experts and government officials in Washington are following and understanding the processes of the Korean National Assembly. It's not to say they don't know them, but it is to say that it's not the top of their list. So what that means is there's a process going on in the National Assembly. What I understand is during the negotiations last fall, the timeline and the process was not discussed in detail. And so again, I'm an optimist, and I see this as a process that is little understood or not well understood in Washington, coming up with expectations of a president that always says, where's the money? I signed it when? Where's the money? Which is a reasonable expectation if there hadn't been a discussion of the process. The process is pretty straightforward, and it's moving. I just was at the National Assembly this morning talking to lawmakers exactly about this topic. It's moving along more quickly than normal because they understand the necessity, and that was even before the announcement by President Trump last week of a potential to raise the stakes. So I think that you ask, do they see this political stalling? No, I think they see this as they don't understand why it hasn't been done. And I think that's what's perhaps at the heart of this recent friction.
Mm-hmm. So there could be some misunderstanding regarding how the nature of Korean politics actually works.
And a miss on both sides for not laying out very specifically last fall, once we sign here, then we move to this process, and then it takes this long, and then we'll start seeing the money. I think they just sign and skip to where's the money, and that's reasonable. So I think that's what also I think that can be worked out once the process is outlined and understood, and it's also emphasized, which I'm sure the Korean government is doing, that this is being moved through the assembly even quicker than normal.
Right. So as in line with that, we are aware that President Trump, he's continuing to stress that, his expectation that Korea will act swiftly when it comes to, strategic investments like the Alaska pipeline. How much pressure do you think is there right now within America to secure a quick, tangible results, especially since they're ahead of the midterms?
Well, I mean, I think there is always in any presidential system, any president of the United States is always looking for investment and economic growth. As you know, and as we've all seen, President Trump is eager to show results more that are quicker than his predecessors and show real investment money, investment dollars coming in. He is very focused all the time on the deals that are being signed, the billions or trillions that are being promised and pledged. He's also very focused on making sure that there can be a renewal of the manufacturing capacity of the United States. So, and in addition to that, he looks at the trade deficits and sees this strategy as a way to reverse the trade deficit. So, putting all those together, first and foremost, any president is always eager for investments from South Korea, Japan, Netherlands, other countries to build U.S. capacity, to increase trade. That's standard. Trump is very results focused, very focused on the bottom line, the dollar symbols, and also how it can change the deficit. So I know I didn't address the midterm, but I don't see it as the dynamic changing with the political calendar because it's the same message from day one. If you look back over it's been a year that Trump has been in office, every day there's been a focus on increasing investment, decreasing the trade deficit, and using tariffs as a tool as needed.
Right. So it comes from Trump wanting to see the outcome
That's right.
as soon as possible. But since you've played a key role in managing Seoul-Washington coordination during sensitive periods in the past, so we wonder how serious would the risks be if this trade impasse isn't resolved as soon as possible?
If I hadn't seen what happened last spring, and how the Korean companies have kind of dealt with the uncertainty from the various tariff decisions and the negotiations, I would be more concerned. For sure, on paper, this is potentially very damaging to the relationship, to cross investment on both ways, to trade. It could decrease interest in Korean companies doing more in the United States. But so while I see a significance to the uncertainty that we're seeing, each kind of bump in the road that Korean companies and Korean government, U.S. companies and U.S. government manage, the more confidence I get. And I think it comes from the fact that I understand and I know how the Korean companies they're not investing because Trump is putting the tariffs out there or because Biden offered IRA incentives. They're investing because this is the way that they would be going anyway. This is where they see their economic future. They're making these investments. Managing the uncertainty, again, as Korean companies get better at it, it gives me more confidence. Doesn't mean we should try to inject uncertainty in this situation. Obviously, business leaders all tell us that certainty is what they seek, but I think I think the risk is relatively low based on what I've seen over the last year.
Right. So we are really at the process of going there. But since we are at the process, we cannot not talk about, Trade Minister Kim Jong-un visiting Secretary Howard Lutnick. But we are aware that there were no specific breakthrough that was achieved lately. So from your experience, do you think there's any realistic kind of room for movement from the U.S. in the coming weeks?
I mean, if we think back to last October, there was little expectation that a deal would be struck at APEC when President Trump was in Gyeongju meeting President Lee, and it came together at the last minute. So I think that what we're seeing is the United States perhaps adopting a South Korean approach to, getting everything done at the, fixing and compromising at the last minute. So I don't, again, I mentioned this before, I don't think that this is a a rupture is possible. I think that their negotiation will succeed, and even if it doesn't, and if the tariffs are raised, I suspect that then further negotiations would go on, and to try and manage that and return back to the agreed upon levels from last year. So confident that when we get to the deadline just before, we'll have a compromise.
Right. Let's hope for that too. But speaking of, concerns, we still have a lot of concerns about how it would proceed. You mentioned a while ago that it has Trump's latest pressure, it has less to do with the midterms. Mm-hmm. But what about the upcoming Supreme Court ruling on the legality of, President Trump's reciprocal tariffs? How much influence do you think that has on, the tariff threats right now?
I think that's a good question, and it can't be discounted. President Trump believes that tariffs are an important diplomatic tool. He believes that they have boosted the American economy and brought in lots of investment. So if he and his team are feeling that this tool could be taken away, and he's trying to build the strongest case possible to maintain them by saying how effective they've been, you raise the tariffs a little bit, you get more investment more quickly. I'm not sure. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know if this works as a legal case, but I think in the court of public opinion, these are the kind of moves that are persuasive. So I do think that this approaching deadline could be changing the calculus about how the president and his team seek to use tariffs and seek to make the case for continued use of tariffs. I'm hoping that South Korea-U.S. relationship is not a casualty to that pressure. I don't think it is. I think it's really about, as I said before, I signed this, where's the money, and trying to move that along, get those two together.
Right. But because of the headlines that we're, seeing recently, there's uncertainty weighing heavily on Korean industries like autos and pharmaceuticals as well. Then, Mr. Haggard, what are some realistic ways that South Korean companies can actually buffer themselves from some kind of policy whiplash?
I think that the real question is for Korean companies to tell the world how they manage whiplash so well. And I'm not talking about the relationship with the United States. I'm talking about the fact that in the last less than a year and a half, Korea's had declaration of martial law, no leadership or no official formal leadership, uncertainty about leadership, impeachment, a presidential election, and then add into that a new president in the United States, tariffs, trade negotiations, summitry. This has all been managed incredibly well, and in my view, not my view, in the view of the KOSPI. You have deals that are being struck, the KOSPI is going up, the Korean economy is, again, I'm not an economist, but it's, by most measures, even while people, I think, feel some of the same affordability issues and some of the same rich getting richer, poor not as much, same issues we're seeing globally. Within all of that, Korea has managed all of this uncertainty. And so I guess I have an answer. I know I haven't answered your question, but the answer is with the Korean companies. How have they managed to keep a steady path, to keep moving forward, even within all of this uncertainty? Hyundai and POSCO are announcing steel plant investments. Samsung is increasing their chip and fab investment. SK is announcing new plans to partner with SMR companies. The drumbeat keeps going because this is, as we talked about before, this is what's built into the system. South Korean companies and working with U.S. companies. So I think that's really the answer. That the South Korean companies they look at this year of experience, year plus, where they've dealt with this political uncertainty, with the uncertainty from the United States, and they've been able to keep the vision, and the vision is invest and partner with the United States. And again, whether that comes because of tariffs or whether it focuses on ships or whether it focuses, I think these are all just, all part of the same vision for greater partnership.
So let's hope they would find their way moving forward as well. Now, you've observed the evolution of U.S. trade policies across different administrations there. So do you think President Trump's use of tariffs as kind of a leverage is now going to be normalized? And how would you say we adapt to this kind of shift?
So again, not an economist, but when I look at the political and geopolitical trends, I see a lot of movement, extremes going from one to another. You have we see trends in Korea as well. A liberal president becomes a conservative. In the United States, conservative becomes liberal. There's a lot of movement back and forth in politics, and I think that's accompanied by also swings in fiscal and trade policy. So I actually think that while there could be a temptation to keep tariffs if they're seen to protect or they're perceived to protect American manufacturing and is seen and perceived to encourage manufacturing, could be very difficult for any politician coming in to turn away from that. But I actually feel like probably the response, if there is a move back to a liberal or democratic leadership, would be to move back towards globalization and emphasis on trade. And so I think that's as well as I can do. Talking about international trade is not my thing, but I think we see trend lines and we see how politicians use trade and tariffs, and I think I would expect a change back if there's a change in administration.
Right. Now, finally, before we let you go, you have decades of experience, firsthand insight into alliance dynamics. So if tariffs were actually to stay under President Trump's second term, what do you think is needed to actually restore predictability and also rebuild the kind of trust between Seoul and Washington?
That's really that's the best question, because that's what all business leaders are when I talk to them. They're saying, how do we get certainty? I think there was a big sigh of relief when we had the last summer and the fall, where the agreements were put in place, and we could see that we were going towards a standard or certain tariff level, which again, less pushback from Korea than I anticipated, given the fact that there is a free trade agreement in place that is mostly no tariffs at all. So I think what that means is that there is an understanding that, exactly as you said, that certainty is what they're looking for and can be managed, whatever the level of tariffs there might be or whatever incentives there might be, whether there might be sticks or carrots, as long as there's a certainty and understanding of how the relationship is set up. I think we'll continue to see increased trade and investment. The trust piece is harder. I think that we're in a good place. I think that it's a presidential task first and foremost and I don't think President Lee has done a very good job working to understand President Trump, and I think we're seeing that reflected in President Trump coming to Korea, having successful meetings, not just but having meetings and concluding that deal. I think that came from an increased trust that the President Trump had in President Lee that I think was perhaps not there at the start of President Lee's tenure, not based on who President Lee is or was, but more based on the perception from some in Washington that a liberal government was going to be less productive a partner. So start with the leaders, work on having the trust at least not undermined by kind of a challenging relationship. And then I think we just lean on all the ties that exist and have confidence that those will actually, the alliance of our troops that are here, the 3.5 million Korean Americans, the 100,000+ Koreans who are studying each year in the United States, the 200,000 Americans who live in Korea, and then of course all of the economic data, the billions in trade. I think we lean on that and hope that can restore, that this baseline cultural and personal relationship and trust and understanding, along with a leader level, a kind of certainty or steadiness can restore some of what has been a rocky, get us back on solid footing, because it has been a bit of a rocky road this year with not as much certainty as I think both who care about the relationship would perhaps prefer to see.
Right, definitely. So let's hope the trust between the two traditional allies would be rebuilt as soon as possible. Thank you so much for your insights tonight.
All right. Thanks so much for having me on. Have a good night.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.